Good morning. It's Thursday, July 16th, and you're here at The Doctor is In, Ask Dr. Arwady. I'm Sybil Madison, your Deputy Mayor for Education and Human Services. So happy to be back with you, Dr. Arwady.
Hello, everybody.
Dr. Allison Arwady is our Commissioner for the Chicago Department of Public Health. This is where you can get the latest on COVID in Chicago, and it's also where we answer your questions. You can put them in the box below. You can also send them to us using Facebook or Twitter in the hashtag AskDrArwady. Haven't been here in a while, but we still always check our physical distance. We're doing really well here. And a reminder to you also to really keep that physical distance in mind wherever you go when you are outside of your own family bubble, and to wear a face covering when you cannot, especially when you cannot keep that distance. All right, so let's get started on what's new for today in terms of COVID and data.
All right, sounds good. So if people saw yesterday, we did a press conference with the mayor, really talking about where are we in Chicago? What are our concerns? What are we seeing in terms of changes in the data? And I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you would like. Let's go ahead and pull up our dashboard. So as always, you can go to chi.gov/COVID- to get there directly. You can also always get there by going to chicago.gov/coronavirus, and then latest data up at the top. So if we pull up our daily dashboard here, we talked yesterday at the press conference that we were very close to being at a point of having more than 200 new cases on average. Yesterday we were in the 190s, and in fact, if we look today, you can see on confirmed cases here on the left, we are at 209 on average new daily cases per day. Not unexpected, but it does mean that it pushes us right here anyway in Chicago back into what's called a high incident state, meaning that we have a lot of COVID here in Chicago. We this is the number that we use where we're thinking about the size of gatherings and the likelihood that in a gathering of a given size, there will be someone with COVID, and so on. Reaching 200 does not mean it's not an automatic time to make
many factors
that play into this. But what we had said and what is true is that now that we are back over 200, at least today, first we'll see what happens. I expect we probably will continue to see that go up a little bit. But behind the scenes, we're looking at the rate of change that we're seeing there. We worry a lot more if we're seeing a much greater change than we do a small change. 1 week of even a very, very big change in terms of the number of cases would make us take an action in the same way that a medium amount of change for 2 weeks would, or a smaller amount of change for 4 weeks with. And maybe we can show some more of that behind the scenes data if people would be interested in the future.
But that does remind me that when we were back in March, one of the things, even when there were very few cases, was that there were the doubling.
That's right, the rate of change. So exactly, it's about like how steep is that curve? How quickly are we seeing changes come in? As epidemiologists, in a lot of ways, there's two things we worry about. One is just the burden, this number, how many cases are out there. But the other one, actually just as important, is that rate of change. And so where we look around the country, places that are going up very, very dramatically, really suggests that places are in very poor control. So if you look on our graph here, you can see that over here on the right, our daily case rates here, even our daily numbers, it's up a little bit, but we're not seeing anything dramatic there. That's definitely what we want to continue. Our outbreak broadly remains in control here. But now that we're back over that 200, it means that we will be paying additional attention to any of our epidemiologic risk factors. So we're looking really closely. Where is this being driven? We talked yesterday about the fact that we are now seeing the biggest number of new cases in the 18 to 29-year-old age group. And let me show you on the dashboard actually how we looked at that, so you can explore some more. So we came here and we switched to look at characteristics by age. And you can see, first of all, it shows you cases and people tested and deaths and positivity rates by age, but then also on the right here, you can see what's been happening over time. And so on this upper graph here, you can see that back in May, we were peaking. See that gray? those are people who are over 80. We were seeing many cases in people who were in those older age groups. Whereas now, this red line here are people who are in the 18 to 29-year-old group. They were our lowest group, not counting the children, who are this blue group that's been very low all along. They were our lowest group early on, but now that the outbreak is broadly under good control, do you see how that shifted? And that red line is now on top. So you can change the date range here. So say you only want to look, at what's been going on over the last month, for example. You just change it like that, and you're able to look and see what's been happening over the last month. And you can see our top group here is that 18 to 29-year-olds in red, followed by the 30 to 39-year-olds in blue, followed by the 40 to 49-year-olds in yellow. The dashed line is the average for the city. And so, and if you wanted to, you can hit this just to show people how to do it. You can expand this out, even if you want to be able to explore this more. I just want to give you a sense of how you can pull some of this up. So, some of the other numbers that we look at, our total number of cases is at 55,836 cases. Our total number of deaths is at 2,701. You can see that our deaths are down to 4 deaths per day. That's great compared to where we had been. If you click here, let's get to 0. I think we will have a day of 0 probably fairly soon. We've had a couple of days with just 1. But I want to talk a little bit more about the people tested and the positivity rate, because it's something that we've been getting a fair bit of questions about, and I want people to understand this because it can be a little confusing. Even for those of us who look at the data every day, there's a lot going on. So first of all, what we have reported on the dashboard right now is about individual Chicagoans being tested. It is not about the total number of tests done. And so sometimes people will ask, for example, as of today, our 7-day average for number of tests done is actually for the first time over 6,000. We're doing an average of 6,005 tests per day. And if you look at our daily summaries, which are available, you'll see that. But the people tested, so it basically excludes people who are getting repeat testing. Right. So if you're getting tested every week because you live in a long-term care facility, or you work in a long-term care facility or another high-risk setting, you're getting multiple tests for follow-on, or you're having procedures and needing multiple tests in that setting, we don't count you sort of over and over again typically here. And so we have been reporting, and that is the more traditional way where we talk about percent positivity. You actually talk about the number of positive tests divided by the number of individuals tested, not the number of tests that are done. But in many other jurisdictions, and in fact the way that they're broadly counting it at the state, they're not really doing that deduplicating, it's called, where you pull out people who are coming in, or we do a lot of behind the scenes work to pull out if tests are being reported multiple times, etc. And so what can be a little confusing is that the positivity rate is different depending on what that denominator is, right? The numerator is the same. We are adding an average of 209 new cases every day. But the denominator, if you use 3,877 people being tested versus 6,005 tests being done, is pretty different. And so if we use tests being done, our percent positivity is actually at 3.5%. And the state is increasingly sort of looking at this percent positivity and even using it in some of the decisions around taking steps backwards. So I've asked the team to actually, we'll be making some changes to the dashboard here. It'll probably take a little bit for us to just get all of the data in place, but we'll probably report both positivities, I think, because it's not that one is right and one is wrong, but they're used for different things. And I want to make sure that there's good awareness of it. If we look at the weekly data, this, for example, is where we see that 1 in 50 people in Chicago have now been confirmed to have COVID. 1 in 8 people have been tested. I want those to actually reflect 1 in 8 people have been tested. I don't want somebody who's been tested 20 times falsely driving that up, right? But then at the same, so if you want to understand how much testing is happening, et cetera, it's a little better to understand that individual number. So we'll continue to look at this, but I just want people to know that that is one of the reasons why you might be seeing some different numbers, and we're going to work on probably getting both of it up here just for awareness. On the weekly, this again is where we look at what our change is. So for the week ending July 11th, you can see that our confirmed cases were up just a little bit, 4% over the week prior. Our people tested were down just a little bit, but our numbers tested were up. So this is one of the points we're getting some of that in here. I want to add that. Deaths continue to really fall. Look at that, another 46% drop.
Wow.
We've been dropping really, almost in half week after week, and that's been really good. Hospitalizations also really continue to fall. You can see that in the hospitalization data. Percent positivity is up a bit, again, in this individual way that we've been counting. And so as always, we look at this data, we look at the maps, and we use it to drive resources and drive testing. On Tuesday,
yes.
If folks weren't here, we had someone from CORE on really talking a lot about the city testing. It's been going very well.
It has.
Do you want to add anything about that or?
Oh, no. I
Okay.
mean, we've had record numbers of people tested, like
Yes.
you said. We've been really excited about that.
Yeah.
And as you said, Doctor, we look at zip codes every week, and based on those indicators, we partner with people across the city to get testing up. So
Absolutely.
it's been successful.
Yeah, so I encourage you to keep looking at the data with us. There's a lot of data, even beyond what's on the dashboard. Send in questions as you have it. And I know we're already getting questions in. I just want to say just up front, we're not going to talk about schools today because there's going to be some more information coming out broadly, thinking about frameworks for schools. We'll probably have guests on here talking about schools next week. So I don't want to kind of get ahead of ourselves on that. So just know that we'll sort of hold that, but we've been doing a ton of work, of course, planning and thinking about what this looks like for schools. Broadly, as long as our outbreak is in quite good control, which it is at the moment,
Yes.
We're very actively thinking about a lot of different options for schools. So more to come on that, and keep your ears open and be ready to have that be a major point of discussion next week.
All right. So let's jump into questions
Yep.
here. Ryan McMahon from Facebook. Are the new cases in the 18 to 29 groups because many work in bars and restaurants?
Okay, great question. So my team has been doing, of course, we always do a lot of work to see what is driving anywhere where we're seeing increases. We've not seen a lot of cases linked to people reporting work in those environments. Now, of course, some of this gets down to we do the case investigation and the contact tracing for every case. So if the person who we're doing the case investigation for, is not answering the phone, is not giving the answers, we do not always have full information, right? I want you to understand that. The health department receives what we get when we get a positive case in most instances is literally a name, a phone number, and an address. And sometimes not even all of that. Sometimes we have to do some work to find the phone number or uncover the address. And the age, we know the age typically. And then we are very quickly working to start the case investigation process, reach out. That's where, we've talked about this previously. And there is quite a long questionnaire that we engage with to really understand what the risk factors are. We know in that 18 to 29-year-old group, just to give you a sense, we know that they are more likely to have traveled out of state than people in our other groups. Not surprising, but part of, as we were thinking about putting some of that quarantine in place for higher risk states, recognizing that younger people perhaps are more likely to travel, are more mobile. So, that's one example of sort of an increased risk factor. We also found that this group, again, not surprisingly, but it does play out in the data, more likely to have more contacts with friends as opposed to family. And even where we ask about, do you know that you've had exposure to someone with COVID? Much more likely to be sort of in a friend or in a social type setting there. We ask about employment, certainly. We ask about this whole range of things. But it's not that we've seen a big surge of cases among people employed in these settings, for example. It's not that we've seen a big surge attached to one particular institution or one particular gathering. Certainly, if and when we see that, we act on that information. But I think, my feeling on this actually is our industries, and particularly our bars and restaurants, by and large, have actually been doing a very good job of making their settings as safe as they can be. I don't want to speak for everybody because we know there have been some instances where people are not doing the right thing, and the city has stepped up enforcement there.
Yeah.
So, if you see an institution that is not doing social distancing, that is not having the mask, that is not doing the right thing for COVID, you can call 311. That turns into a complaint, and we are working to follow up, depending on the level and how many complaints we're getting. Initially, there's a piece of education there, and then there is on-site enforcement all the way up to shutting places down. That has happened. And it is something that we will continue to do. But my feeling actually on this, and what we're seeing in the data, is that the risk and where we're seeing spread happening is more in the, always we see the most spread in households, okay? That has been true from the beginning. That is where people have the most close contact, and from the beginning we've sort of said, protecting your household, being really cautious if you've got people at high risk, those are the people who you're in close contact with. But beyond that, it's a lot of actual connections, not in these formal places, right? It's people who are getting together in the informal, the socializing, the getting together, the party, but maybe not even the party, just the getting together. I feel like COVID's over. And in some ways, I think when we're in indoor spaces, especially, people, and I'm glad people have COVID more in mind in those spaces, those are riskier spaces, but in our institutions that have done a lot to really enforce masks and create, reminders of keeping distance on the floor and, things in the elevators, whatever it may be, we're not seeing a whole lot being driven in workplaces and even in some of these settings. And I think, frankly, where there is not any reminders and people have their guard down, you're more likely to sort of have your guard down against COVID with people who are, your friends and who you're close to. And this is where, with us being in phase 4, we've said you can expand your circle, right? And that's allowable, but you still remember this think twice around what is my risk? What is the risk of anybody else in my close circle with underlying conditions, with people, especially over the age of 60? And then there are activities that are dangerous and less dangerous. And if you can always keep a 6-foot distance, you and everybody else can always have a mask on, especially if that is outside, and especially if you know everybody and there's not crowds, that's a pretty safe activity. Yeah. But as though the answers to those questions start not being true, the risk is higher. It's not a surprise to me that younger people are where we're seeing more cases. I don't want to blame, this is not about blaming younger people. We've not seen an enormous surge, right? I just showed you the data. In some ways, I'm really pleased that we're doing a better job of protecting those higher risk folks. But it's everybody's job to really recognize that there's the potential for spreading COVID, and even younger people who are less likely to have this serious illness. We've had plenty of young people with serious illness who've been hospitalized. We've had, even some deaths in that group.
Yeah, I just wanted to zero in on this, especially if you're outside, because I'm wondering if there's a little bit of a feeling that, I'm outside, so I can relax on the distance or the mask because I'm outside.
Yeah, and being outside decreases the risk, but it does not eliminate the risk, okay? And so this it's an area where we continue to learn. I think, the importance of thinking about ventilation and having windows open, and outside is definitely safer than in, but it is not safe. It is not like just because I am outside, if I am within 6 feet of somebody and I don't have a mask on, it's not like outside is in some way protecting me entirely. So, I am more concerned about indoor places, but if you're getting together, even outside with people who are not already in your close circle group, wear the mask, especially if you can't keep that 6-foot distance. I've been watching, I'm out and about every day, and, people are keeping it moving for the most part on the lakefront and generally doing a good thing. But it worries me where I see, even along on the lakefront or even just downtown or walking, I see sort of groups of people that are close together, and I don't think they're all probably in the same household. And just put the mask on, really. It's something that you can do that helps protect others, and also just sends a signal, I think, that you're taking COVID seriously.
Yeah. Speaking of masks,
yes.
Renee Shanks Kofi Bruce from Facebook. I am still not understanding why masks protect exhalations but not inhalations. I need a better explanation.
Okay. So I would love maybe we'll post in the comments and maybe even show on Facebook here. There's been some really, really nice visuals about this. PBS did a good one, for example. So we'll post a couple of links in the comments right now that sort of show actually when you put on the face covering what happens in terms of what's coming out of your mouth. And the bottom line is that having that covering it is not 100%, but it dramatically decreases how much is coming out. Now, in terms of what's coming in, there is probably some small amount of protection that you get yourself. So I don't want to say it's like there is nothing that there is some protection. But what I don't want to do is sort of falsely give people an assumption that where I have a covering on, that I am fully protected. It's why keeping that, you've heard me say many times, wearing a mask does not replace the 6 foot distance. Mm-hmm. If I had a choice between them, I would take a 6 foot distance over a mask every time. It's part of why, I feel comfortable here with Sybil, where we've got our distance, we're not moving, and there's another, you need to be able to understand what we're saying where we don't have a mask on. But the mask is another layer, and the 6 foot distance is, because when people are talking and speaking and even what's coming out there, most of it is these big droplets that fall to the ground, etc. So if you're close enough to somebody and they don't have a mask on, all right, and they're coughing or sneezing, the stuff that's landing on the mask instead of on you, yes, that is having some protection, but it is not totally protecting you. There are masks that are worn in more healthcare settings that have very tight seals, and there's testing that happens around those. Mm-hmm. But the face covering would help you in a setting where there's not a 6 foot distance, especially from those larger droplets. But I don't want people to just assume, again, that a mask is good enough. And so that's the bottom line. I think they're very good. And if everybody is therefore wearing a mask, you're all helping to protect each other. Yes. In a setting where others are not wearing masks, definitely put your mask on, because you are, from that large droplet way, if you can't keep that 6 foot distance, it's definitely having some protection there. But it's the fact is that air, those are not tight seals. Air can come in and around, and it's not a complete protection. So we ask everyone to wear masks and to keep 6 foot distance as much as possible, because together those are the things that help protect us. Yeah. And in a setting where you can't do one of those things, for goodness sakes, do the other one. If you're getting a haircut, you can't keep a 6 foot distance, make sure people have the mask on, right? Mm-hmm. We got a question about restaurants the other day, and you have to have your mask off when you're eating and drinking, but have it on otherwise. If you're just sitting or socializing, if you're getting up and moving around, it's another level of protection is the bottom line, and I want people to have those two together. The outdoors would be sort of another level in there, and then not having contact with people you don't know would be another.
Got it. Okay. Naz Khan from Facebook. Is it possible to transmit the virus through pool water?
It is not possible to transmit the virus through pool water. The virus does not travel through water, pool water, tap water, lake water, any of the water. The concern is that if you are in a pool, as always, the concern is your interaction with living, breathing humans. And so if you are in a pool by yourself, you're not going to get COVID, basically. But if you are in a pool with somebody else, especially if you are within 6 feet and you can't really probably have, you can't really wear a mask in that setting. Kids in particular are not good at keeping distance. You think about locker rooms, you think about other settings. It's all the things that sort of come around pools that are the risk, not the pool water.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tarek Fayumi from Facebook. There's so much talk about vaccines. So this question may seem like a challenging one, although we all know that Dr. Arwoody's up for any challenge. But what kind of environment are we looking at come the fall? So I don't know if that's the environment is concerning the vaccine, I guess. Mm-hmm.
All right, good. So there's like two big questions in that challenging question. So we are not going to have a COVID vaccine this fall, just to be clear about that. We are making really nice progress. If people have been following the news, there's a number of vaccine candidates that have been able to continue to move along through that, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And I've been very encouraged by the fact that some of those vaccine candidates, they're doing the testing and they're able to show that people are developing immunity. And that's developing antibodies, not just the kind of antibodies that you can get when you get an antibody test, but something called a neutralizing antibody that is sort of the strongest kind, loosely speaking, of antibody that even stops the virus from being able to get into the cells. They're the best kind of antibodies to be able to develop, and some of these vaccine candidates, people are developing those. So the progress has been good there, but we are just getting into that phase 3 testing, which is when we're testing broadly across large populations,
including those who have vulnerabilities to
including
COVID,
those who have vulnerabilities, people who are older. This is where, we shared information that University of Illinois at Chicago is enrolling people right here in Chicago for a vaccine trial, and we can maybe post that link again, or you can look back to last week if you're interested in potentially being part of a vaccine trial. There will be more opportunities. I think Northwestern's probably going to have one. All of the big centers and maybe some of the small ones will be part of some vaccination trials coming up here. But the bottom line is that it's going to still take some time to get the answers to those questions. So progress has been good. I think the most optimistic, that we would be likely to see one of these trials sort of finish up would maybe be the end of the year, kind of beginning of next year. And then we would be moving into getting the final approvals and the production. All along I've been saying that I think the most likely time that we'll see a candidate or candidates for vaccine, if I had to take a guess, would be sort of early in the 2021 frame. I think that is still sort of likely. We may see.
And that's very fast.
It's very fast. It's the fastest that we've seen with all of the appropriate safety and testing in place, which we feel so strongly about. There is not going to be approval of a vaccine that has not had all of the appropriate safety, efficacy, and follow-up, right? So we got to make sure all of the appropriate, testing and follow-on is done. And so, the fact that we've sped up that some of these vaccines are already in production, even while the testing is going on, that's some of what will let us speed it up. So we may have good news on a vaccine possibly by the end of the year, but when we get good news, that does not equal to I can go get a shot tomorrow, right? It's the sort of prioritization and how it foods in. So where I think about the fall, I'm not thinking about COVID vaccine yet. I'm thinking about the fact that we are going to move into cooler weather here. We're not going to have outdoor opportunities. We're going to have more people inside, and we know that other viruses, cold, flu, etc., spread more in the winter because we are inside more. We know that we are going to see a regular seasonal influenza. So we're thinking a lot about flu vaccines, which is a way to really prevent serious outcomes from flu and hospitalization burden there. And we're thinking about school and what is that potentially going to look like. And we're thinking about really how are we going to be doing as a country. I think so much of our success here in Chicago, which has been good to date, it really has, that progress is threatened by the fact that around the country we are seeing still just a lot of outbreaks in very poor control. And I worry about seeing even small increases here in community if we don't get on top of that and people continue to just think that COVID is over and not do the things that we know protect us. We really have the potential to see increases here that would mean we would have to make some tough decisions and move backwards. So I don't know what the fall is going to look like, is the bottom line. I'm hopeful in a best case scenario that we're able to sort of keep things in good control here and have as close to sort of our new normal as we can. In a worst case scenario, we're going to need to roll things back. Either way, we'll want to make sure that people are getting flu vaccines, and we're doing everything we can to keep everybody as healthy as possible and not have big surges of other diseases besides COVID. And we're already, we're preparing hospitals, we're working together.
I was going to ask, when does flu vaccine season kick off?
Yeah, so because of concerns for COVID and the fact that we are seeing much of the way that we've typically done flu clinics are like, come one, come all, right? Like,
yes.
Cram as many people in and like do as many shots as we can. That's not going to be a safe way to do flu vaccines. So we're thinking about strategies for flu distribution that will probably mirror what we use for COVID distribution. So they've sped up a little bit to try to get flu vaccine out a little sooner. So I think we may see flu vaccine here possibly as early as maybe even late next month, or we're sort of moving, certainly moving into September. Probably like in August, September will be when we start to see it available here. And it'll be really important. We're going to test some new strategies. We'll definitely want people to, we always recommend flu vaccine for everybody over the age of 6 months, unless directed otherwise by a doctor. And that will be especially important this year. So yeah, so I think about a lot of things for the fall, and hopefully keep seeing good news in terms of vaccine progress, because goodness knows we need it.
Yep. Okay. Great challenging question. Dan Smith from Facebook. I washed my mask and had to run out while it was still wet. It actually made wearing the mask more comfortable and cool in the hot weather. Is there any problem with wearing a wet mask?
No problem with wearing a wet mask. If you find having a wet or a damp mask makes it cooler, makes it easier to tolerate, not a problem. The way that mask is working is that the levels of the fabric are sort of helping keep your air and your germs from coming out, and that would not be compromised by it being wet. So if you find that more comfortable, go at it.
Hey, a cool tip for us.
A cool tip
for the upcoming hot weather, right? Amy Jo Walker from Facebook. If a state is added to the list days after we've returned to Chicago from that state, do we still need to quarantine?
Oh, very good question. You do not. So we add, and just for folks who maybe haven't been following this, chicago.gov/coronavirus, right up at the top is all things related to the quarantine order. And every Tuesday we update that list, and it goes into effect the following Friday to give people time, in case there's travel. So for example, Iowa was added to the list this week. If you returned from Iowa 10 days ago, you do not need to go into quarantine for the next 4 days, just to give you an example. It is a prospective based on the risk at the time that state is added. So the date that state takes effect, and we do, if you actually look at the list, we say which day that state was added to the list. So, Arizona, Florida, Louisiana, et cetera, were all added as of July 2, or effective as of July 2. We added Iowa and Oklahoma this week, and they are effective as of July 14. So
if you return from either of those two places or any other place on the list,
before the date that it went into effect. So it is in effect and moving forward as of that date. Very good question.
Yeah. Okay. Joanne Pandas from Facebook. How are they tracking people when they come back to make sure they're staying home?
All right. So I've gotten this question a lot too. Yeah. So let's talk a little more about the travel quarantine order. And I've been answering, I do daily question answering, and most of the questions this week have been around this. So if you've got additional questions, I encourage you to look at the daily questions we've been posting. So there's a lot of ways to potentially approach this order, and we looked really hard at the different ways that other states and jurisdictions are doing this. And there are some places that have put a lot of resources very aggressively into enforcing this. So in Hawaii, for example, which, as an island with a lot of travelers, has done a lot around this quarantine, has had it in place for a long time. They have been very aggressive. They track people from airports. They make sure people can't hire cars. They have very aggressively enforced. There's, laws around requiring reporting. Now, there have been some legal challenges to some of that, but they've really put a lot of resources in. There are other places that have, at different points in the outbreak, have tried to pull over cars with out-of-state license plates and see when have people traveled. There have been some efforts to make lists of travelers and follow up with them. Our feeling at this point was that we wanted this to be an order. We wanted this to be a law and a requirement because it is a high risk for COVID to travel. We're not saying you can't travel, but if you come back to the city of Chicago, you have to quarantine for 14 days. But we did not feel that right now there was need to put a lot of additional resources into that enforcement piece. We've typically, with all of our orders, they start from a place of education. So right now, for example, it is the law that you are not allowed to leave your house except for medical care if you are sick in the city of Chicago. Still, it's the very first one. It was the first public health order that I signed. And there are penalties that we could be imposing if we learned that you violated that order. Now, are we calling the police on people? We are not doing that. But it allows us to enforce and to sort of put this into some requirements. And what we learned in talking to states was that having these orders in place, first of all, I think it's important for people to be aware. So if you go to that list, and if you haven't been, I encourage you to take a look. We list all the states there, and we show you what right now their daily infections look like per 100,000. And here in Illinois, here in Chicago, we're at about 7 cases per 100,000 per day, just to give you a sense. We are only requiring quarantine places where there's at least twice as much COVID as what we have now. More than 400 cases per day on average here in Chicago. And that's part of why we talked about, for us, where we would think about needing to sort of take a step back in terms of a moving to phase 3 or a quarantine would be where we were at about that 400 case per day, partly because it's equivalent to where we're requiring that for other states. But there are places like Arizona and Florida that have more than 40 cases per day per 100,000. That is 6 times the amount of COVID, 7 times even the amount of COVID that we have here right now. Very, very high risk. And states on this list are not the places you should be traveling.
Yeah.
They just aren't. They're not the places to be having business travel that's not absolutely required. So we are not creating lists at airports or following up on people. We are not pulling over out-of-state license plates. But we are making sure that as people are booking tickets, they're getting information with the airlines, et cetera, that if they travel, there is this requirement to quarantine. We're making sure that there's, signs up at airports. You've probably, if you've been out driving, you've seen signs around, not just in Chicago, but, around Illinois, letting travelers who may be coming in via car get that information. Hotels, Airbnbs are all sharing this requirement.
And employers as well. Whenever we walk into City Hall,
yes,
the list of states is right there.
It's on there, that's right. And so, my goal here, this is, and then we have the ability to enforce it. So if we, when we're doing these investigations, if we find people who have violated that quarantine and spread COVID, for example, we can enforce that, and we will enforce that with fines. But I'm not about, this is not about putting people in jail. This is not sort of at that level. It's about protecting Chicago and getting people to sort of do the right thing. So
it's awareness and responsibility.
It's awareness, responsibility, and then the ability for us to enforce if we detect really significant problems in the course of doing investigations. I think it's the right balance in terms of this order, and we'll continue to follow. And if we need to make adjustments down the line, or we find a practice that works better in another state, it's possible we would adopt it. But I think it's the right balance for where we are now. And please do the right thing. Don't travel to these states right now unless you really have a major need to. And if you travel, quarantine when you get back.
All right. Brittany Lukazuki from Twitter. If my son is traveling from California to Illinois, will he need to quarantine?
He will.
Is it an in-home quarantine? What is involved in a quarantine?
Okay, good.
It's a good follow-up.
It is a good follow-up. So again, there are some good frequently asked questions right on that chicago.gov/coronavirus, and definitely take a look at that and have your son take a look at that, because it answers a lot of these questions. But yes, it can be an in-home quarantine. It can be an in-hotel quarantine. It can be a wherever you were going to be here in Chicago. So if your son was going to come stay with you, he can come and stay with you. But he is not supposed to leave the home, is the point, unless he needs to seek medical care or testing for COVID. You should be careful around recognizing that he is high risk in terms of coming from quarantine. So for 14 days, even within the home, you should be keeping your distance as much as possible, trying to limit that spread within the home. But he can be in your home, that's not a problem. But he is not supposed to be out. He is not supposed to be at parties. He is not supposed to be at work. He is not supposed to be at restaurants. The goal
Not
is
even supposed to be doing essential things like going to the grocery store.
not even supposed to be going to the grocery store. He's supposed to be home. And that's really what the requirement is. And so need to be getting food delivered, or if he's living with you, you can bring it in. But so it's he can be in your backyard. He can be sort of in the area there, but he shouldn't be interacting with anybody outside the home. And that's what the requirement is. Good question.
Great. Okay, so last question for the day. Thamara Dittmeyer. There is a study about certain blood types are more prone to catching COVID-19. Do you have more information about it?
Yeah, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and it has to do with some of the really interesting work that's been done about the genetics of people who get COVID. So we've talked a lot about the genetics of the COVID virus. So quick refresher, COVID is a virus. It is an RNA virus. RNA is like the genetic recipe for the virus to replicate and copy itself in your body. And we see changes in that RNA. Those are the mutations. We've not seen a lot of changes, which is good. It's one of the reasons why we're confident that a vaccine is likely to be effective here. But you also have a genetic code. It's DNA in your case, in terms of humans, and you're born with that genetic code. But there are differences in your DNA, your recipe, between people, and those have impacts for all kinds of things in terms of our risks for disease and many other things. There's been some interesting research looking at people who have gotten COVID or gotten serious effects from COVID, have needed to be hospitalized, ICU, etc., to see are there genetic differences that actually might put people at risk for this. And one of the things that has emerged, although there still needs to be additional work, is around blood type. And what's interesting is where blood type is encoded is very close to the area on the human genome where some other immune modulators, potentially including some that have to do with COVID, are sort of encoded where the recipe is. And so there's still some additional work on that. Definitely, this is not like I have this blood type, I can't get COVID. That is not what we have seen at all, but that perhaps there are some differences there. So jury is still out.
It's not about being more likely to get it.
No.
They're looking at what the impact
it's
is
more
when
the
you
impact.
have
It's
it.
more been around severity, exactly. It's more been around, is there, particularly with blood type A, is there more or less likelihood to need, ICU or get more sick, but we don't know yet. Okay, so it's a really interesting area, and maybe I know we're just about out of time, so I won't dive any more in on genetics, but maybe next week, depending on timing, we'll do a little bit of updates on mutations, both in what we know about genetics of the virus and what we know about genetics in humans, because they're both actually like very interesting areas. But
little teaser there.
Little teaser. Yeah.
Okay, you got any good stuff for us, Doctor?
Yeah, let's see. So first of all, Millennium Park at Home, that's the music series that's been getting some, if you've not looked at one of these, I encourage you to. They're fun. They've got Zeshan B and Muka Paza tonight at 6 p.m. YouTube.com/Chicago DCASE. That's Chicago DCASE. Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. So these are usually the concerts that are big and in Millennium Park. Bring it into your home, have a little outdoor backyard picnic, socially distanced. Sounds good. Also, the mayor yesterday announced City College's debt forgiveness. So thinking about recovery from COVID. This has been, in addition to what are we doing this week and this month and next month with COVID, Chicago has done some, I think, very, very important and pretty groundbreaking work in terms of thinking about what does recovery from COVID look like over the next 4 years, and putting some really concrete things in place about what do we do to make sure people who have been impacted hard by this can sort of come back as a city, what can we think about opportunities, et cetera. So one example of this is called Fresh Start. We've got about 21,000 former City Colleges students who didn't finish a degree. If they return to college, they're actually going to clear the debt. Let them earn a college certificate or degree. So we really want to work that all Chicagoans, no matter what the circumstances are, have access to the resources needed for some of that upward mobility, getting that degree, taking a step forward. So you can go to ccc.edu/fresh start. And even if you yourself, if you have lost your job, or people have, or just recognizing that the line of work you're in is really impacted, City Colleges of Chicago can be a really good place to think about exploring some new opportunities, and this is a good way, if you've had debt previously, to be able to come back and think about maybe getting that degree. So that was really nice.
It was announced on Tuesday.
Oh, was it on Tuesday? Okay.
Yes, and over 10,000 people have reached out so far. So it's
amazing.
It's obvious that
there's a lot of interest
getting the debt
in that.
out of the way removes a real big barrier to people being able to finish up and skill up.
Yeah, I'm really interested actually in this, in the long term. What can we do? COVID has had such a major and in many ways such a negative impact on our city. How do we take some of what we've learned and turn it into kind of opportunity, and shine a light on where we've seen these inequities, and what can we do as a city to come out of this sort of stronger and better. It's one of the main things I think about at the health department, and really the city does overall. So that was a really good piece of good news. And then just in terms of things to do, it's not exactly good news, but I answer every day still. I answer the question about, can mosquitoes carry COVID? They cannot, but mosquitoes can carry West Nile virus. And here in Chicago, we actually had our first West Nile virus mosquito pool. We test around the city. We collect mosquitoes and test them. We had our first West Nile virus test positive for the season. So just a reminder to you that if you are out at that socially distanced picnic or whatever it is, please wear the repellent, be aware of mosquitoes. You don't have to worry about COVID with them, but West Nile is a problem for us here in Chicago, and we want you to empty standing water. If you've got bird baths and flower pots, gutters, tires, toys, they all can collect water. Those are places mosquitoes breed, particularly when we're seeing some of this hot weather. And especially if you're outside, think about wearing, where you can, maybe some longer, lighter color covers, replace screens that have holes, broadly just sort of keep that in mind. You can go to chicago.gov/health. That's the city's regular CDPH page if you want to learn more about mosquitoes.
Yeah. Give it a little love.
Give it a little love, because right now it's all coronavirus all the time. But we do have some other things. So just a quick reminder, just with mosquito season sort of here, that we want people also protecting their health in that way.
All right. My good news is that it's my brother's birthday. Happy birthday, Roger.
Happy birthday.
We'll be back next week on Tuesday and Thursday, and keep in mind that we'll have some guests here, hopefully, that will be talking about education.
Yep.
And plans for the future around that.
Yeah,
so.
Big conversations, as you can imagine, happening. So looking forward to questions. You can keep putting your questions in. We take them and we answer short questions every day. So keep putting them in. Thanks for all the engagement and everything that you are doing.
Yes, we don't want the mayor to have you walk home.
We don't want to turn the car around. We don't want to not just turn the car around, but stop it and make you walk home, as she said yesterday. We want to get on a good trajectory here, keep and protect the progress we've had. You know how to do that. You know the right thing. So keep doing the right thing.
Just think twice,
That's right.
and we will be safe, right?
Yeah. So be safe, Chicago.